오늘 이 자리에 서서 여러분께 인사를 드리라니 참으로 많은 생각들이 추워 지나갑니다. 한평생을 조국의 민주화를 위해 열정을 바쳤고 망명생활을 하면서도 끊임없이 운동을 조직했던 동생 윤한봉의 땀과 혼이 서려 있는 이곳 민족학교에서 기념사를 하려고 하니 목이 메어옵니다. 지난해 갑작스럽게 세상을 뜬 제 동생의 장례식에 먼 길 마다하지 않고 광주까지 와주신 여러분에게 진심으로 가족을 대표해서 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 바르게 살자, 굳세게 살자, 더불어 살자, 뿌리를 알자라는 교훈으로 시작되었던 민족학교가 5.18 진상규명투쟁과 통일운동 그리고 한인공동체를 포함한 미국 내 소수자의 권리와 인권 그리고 민족원을 일깨워주는 다양한 사업 속에서 성장해 왔습니다. 5.18 기념재단 역시 여러분의 적극적인 후원과 성원 속에서 발전해 왔습니다. 올해 처음 민족학교와 5.18 기념재단이 함께 28주년을 기념하는 행사를 하게 되어 진심으로 기쁘게 생각합니다. 저는 한평생을 교사로 재직하면서 제자들에게 민주주의를 가르쳐 왔습니다. 바른 역사를 가르치기 위해 세상에 불의와 타협하지 않고 살아왔습니다. 5월 광주와 우리들이 왜곡된 세상과 타협하지 않고 언제나 정의를 위해 투쟁할 때 해외에서 보내주신 피땀으로 이룬 성원이 없었더라면 오늘의 광주는 존재하지 않았을 것입니다. 지금 이곳 로스앤젤레스에서 행사가 열리는 시간 독일 빌레펠트에서도 제 유럽 5월 민중제 행사가 개최되고 있습니다. 또 이 자리에는 제 유럽 5월 민중제 대표단과 호주 민족문화교육원 대표도 참석하고 계십니다. 지난해 제 유럽 5월 민중제 공동행사에 이어 올해 민족학교와 공동행사까지 저희들은 회해동포 여러분의 노고를 항상 기억하고 있습니다. 다음에는 더 많은 분들이 모여 함께 5월을 이야기할 수 있는 기회가 되기를 희망합니다. 여러분의
from Korea who went to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. So from 67 to 1970, we as a whole family lived in Vietnam. So I've experienced as a child. I was 8 years old when I went in 67. Saw the ravages of war, and I remember my father saying that war is not the answer, and we would be praying, and he would be preaching about the fact that here we are in this situation of war, but this is not the answer. And he would pray for reunification of Korea. So praying was the main thing, you know, in the church community about our country, about Vietnam, about the world, and about world peace. So having had some of that initial grounding about the fact that peace does not come about through war was so deeply rooted in me. And coming to the United States in 1970, as a young person, I was 11, and seeing this thing called racism, and this was something even worse than I thought in my young mind than war. So there was this thing about racism that I had never known about or experienced in Korea that I saw here. And with that, there was also a little bit of learning about class and the separation and segregation. And I learned about civil rights and the struggle of the African Americans in this country. And so there were a lot of questions that I had. And the fact, you know, about I guess growing up learning that there needs to be struggles of people to overcome all kinds of oppression and poverty and war. So when I was in college in 1980, well, 80 I was in college. And by the way, the college that I was in, I went to Occidental College here in LA. Barack Obama at the time was at Occidental College. And now I remember, but I didn't know he was going to be the figure that he is now. But during that time actually, the college was trying to divest, or there was a movement to divest from South Africa. So I remember him also being very actively involved, and he was a great organizer. And so it's like looking back and saying, wow, you know, there I had seen him then. But anyway, in 1980.
한 2분만 잠깐 얘기하고 더 좀 살아있는 얘기는 워크숍에서 한 청년에 대해서 나름대로 좀 소중하게 간직하고 있는 것을 활동을 하면서
중간중간 그 윤암동 선배님에 대해서 얘기가 나오는데 아직까지도 지금 돌아가신 지 지금 이제 1년이 채 안 됐고 여러 가지 본인께서 이 본인의 활동이라는 업적을 많이 밖으로 안 드러내는 분이기 때문에 많은 것들이 알려지지 않은 부분들이 많습니다. 근데 여기 오신 많은 어르신들이나 여기 계시는 분들 통해 가지고 그 과정에서 좀 나중에 좀 상세하게 설명이 돼야 될 부분이 많지만 하여튼 저희들이 뭐 지역적으로는 해외라는 미국이라는 상황에서 활동을 했지만 실질적으로 윤암동 선생님이라는 분을 통해 가지고 많은 분들이 그런 얘기들을 하시더라고요. 미국에 와서 재미한 청년을 보면 꼭 70년도에 특히 이제 광주역에서 있었던 민주화 운동을 했던 청년들을 보는 것 같고, 그래서 사실 미국에서 일어난 자연 발생적인 그런 이 운동이라기보다도 윤 선배님을 통해 가지고 그 당시 70년도에 올 항쟁을 주도하셨던 그런 활동가들의 어떤 정신이나 어떤 삶의 자세들이 미국에 와가지고 윤 선배님을 통해서 실현됐고, 사실 거기에 많이 저희 청년들로서 많이 감동을 받았습니다. 저렇게 열정을 가지고 어떤 민족에 대한 애정을 가지고 살아갈 수 있을까? 그것이 큰 감동으로 남았고, 우리도 미주지만 우리도 뭐 미국에 왔다는 그 자체가 어떤 민족이라는 그런 계급과는 조금 차이가 있었지만 그러한 모습들을 따르고 싶었고, 그 속에서 어떤 조국의 문제, 그다음에 인류사에서 일어나는 모순 부분을 해결.
My name is Maria Elena Encapié, and I am honored to have been asked to speak to you this morning and to celebrate with you this memorial, and in particular to let you know that these issues are personally very important to me. I am an immigrant from Colombia, South America. My family immigrated into the state of Rhode Island, so all the way on the other side of the United States, to work in the textile factories in Rhode Island, and I slowly have made my way over to Los Angeles to work at the National Immigration Law Center, which is based here in Koreatown. And so again, the celebration that you are doing here today and the issues that affect the Korean community and all immigrants are very important to me personally and professionally. I have been asked to speak this morning about the conditions that affect low-wage workers, and as you heard from the presentation just now, low-wage workers, 1 out of every 5 low-wage workers in the United States are foreign-born. And the issues and challenges that face them are many, and I think, again, Jean explained what some of those challenges are. I'm going to be focusing on the exploitation that workers face, and I won't be talking about the most egregious type of exploitation, which is trafficking, since our next speaker, Joanne, will be speaking about that as well. So to begin with, it's important to understand the context, right? The push and pull factors that bring immigrants here to the U.S. Again, there are many, many reasons why people come to the United States or migrate to other countries, but we all know that jobs is one major reason, regardless of whether you came for political reasons, for family reunification. But one of the most important central tenets of migration is that people are coming to look for better jobs, for better economic opportunities, better educational opportunities for their family, and oftentimes for survival, economic survival, because many people do not have that in their home countries. And so lack of economic opportunities in the send-in countries is often what pushes people, often forces people to migrate to the United States. And on the other hand, we have corporate interests, businesses in the United States who feel that they either do not have enough workers here to fill the jobs, or who simply want low-wage workers and are not willing to pay fair wages and provide benefits and workers' rights, leaving U.S. workers not willing to take those conditions, and that pulls people into the United States. So it's critical to understand that in order to understand the situation affecting immigrant workers, we have to look at both labor and immigration policies, and it's really that intersection which is what plays out in people's lives every day. And there are many unintended consequences. The people who write our policies and who sign our policies into law in the United States are so far removed from the realities of what those laws will do and the implications and how they will play out in people's lives. As we know, 1986, many people think of it as the law that provided amnesty or that legalized several million workers. But the other thing that the immigration law of 1986 did was that it created employer sanctions. So for the first time, Congress said it's unlawful, it's illegal for an employer to knowingly hire somebody who is undocumented, who doesn't have papers or authorization to work in the United States. And the thinking behind that in Congress was that if we made it illegal for an employer to hire somebody who's undocumented, that would slow down the undocumented migration to the United States. But in reality, that has not happened, as we've seen, because again, for economic, environmental, political reasons, people have continued coming here. And instead, what we have seen is that there are unintended consequences, like people need to work, and so workers are buying false documents. They are very, very prevalent, right? We can walk down the street to MacArthur Park and buy false documents here in Los Angeles or in other parts of our city, and that's true all over the United States. Employers also know this, right? Employers hire workers and don't ask for papers, or employers will tell workers where to buy the papers or supply them and charge them in order to get a job. There are many, many different levels to this. Finally, there's a lot of discrimination, right? An employer would prefer to hire somebody that doesn't look illegal. I look around this room, I would not be able to tell who is really documented or undocumented unless you are discriminating and only looking at people based on their skin color or their accent or whether they speak English or not. But today we continue having an increase in employment discrimination because employers are often afraid that if they hire somebody who may be undocumented, they will be sanctioned or penalized by the government. It is also important to understand that immigrant workers, especially if they are undocumented, may face retaliation by the employers who know that they could use the fact of deportation against the workers, and I will talk a little bit more about that. So some immigrant workers, looking at the labor law side, have limited protections just because of the job that they do. So for example, if you are a temporary worker, if you work at a temporary agency, you will just get you're entitled to minimum wage, but you're not entitled to other types of benefits like workers' compensation and other things because you're going through this agency. Or if you are a day laborer, you're often just working for the day and not for a particular employer that's providing all of these other benefits. And often many day laborers who are looking for work just for the day are considered independent contractors, and they truly are independent contractors. They are people with certain skills, they have their own tools. They also have farm workers, agricultural workers, who are actually excluded from most of the laws except for minimum wage protections. So except for California, where we have a state law that allows agricultural workers to organize into a union, for example, farm workers around the rest of the country are not protected by the National Labor Relations Act. That is true of domestic workers as well. And what this has resulted in is that workers around the country of all nationalities, including U.S. born, are organizing, right? So now we have a National Day Labor Organizing Network to try to organize and demand for the same rights. We have the United Farm Workers Union. We have other organizations that are organizing farm workers as well. We have now a National Domestic Workers Association that recently got formed, which is very, very exciting and very powerful, since they are often some of the most vulnerable workers. But because of the barriers that immigrants face on the job, they are often very afraid to speak up. On the other hand, many immigrant workers are very politicized and very conscious about changing the conditions, and that they do have rights as a human being, that they have certain human rights that they should be demanding. And so, unfortunately, though, employers try to use the fear of deportation and immigration raid, for example, as one of the consequences to try to keep workers exploited and depressed. And oftentimes we hear that immigrants are taking jobs away from immigrants and they are depressing wages and working conditions. Our perspective is the complete opposite, that it's companies, that it is employers that are violating the rights, that they are the ones who are depressing working conditions, because they are refusing to give workers these rights as well as to hire U.S. workers in these jobs. And that it's important for all of us to organize together and to change these policies to lift up the working conditions for all workers, whether people have immigration status, work authorization, or not. Because my time is coming up as well, I will quickly just wrap up. We do have a workshop where we will be going into some of these programs more specifically, but there are particular federal government programs that are making matters worse for immigrant workers on the job. And in particular, we look at the 1996 immigration law, which created an employment verification system, an electronic system called the Basic Pilot Program. It's now called E-Verify, which employers are using to try to document who is authorized to work. But this system has so many inaccuracies that, in fact, the people most affected by it are U.S. citizens, especially naturalized citizens, because of the mistakes. Similarly, there are letters from the Social Security Administration that, again, have many inaccuracies, or that employers, knowing that workers are undocumented, are using them to retaliate against them. And then I will just switch forward to the reality of what we're living now. Probably the greatest are immigration raids and immigration detentions, whether at the workplace or in people's homes, as we've seen our community members in Koreatown affected by this, and recently in February in Van Nuys in the Valley. And so we've seen over the last year and a half, record numbers of immigration raids and detentions happening. And we've seen a renewed effort by the federal government to crack down on immigrants. And the impact of this has been to tear families apart. We've had record numbers of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents detained as well as a result of racial profiling. And the number of violations that are happening at the hands of the immigration, customs, and enforcement agents is increasing every day. And so with that, I will actually just end by inviting you all to a hearing that we are having here in Los Angeles on the 24th of June, and we have, these will be passed out to you, but this is a hearing that is being organized. It's the last one of a series of a national commission on ICE misconduct, on misconduct by the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement Agency, and how they have been violating all of our community's rights, our civil rights, our constitutional rights, not just of undocumented immigrants. Again, the way that immigration raids are happening today, they are happening on, they're detaining U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, people with work authorization, and undocumented immigrants, completely violating their rights. So please join us. It's a public hearing. There will be speakers, both women and workers, men and women who were detained during these raids. And this will be, at the end of this hearing, one of the unions, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, will be putting together a report to Congress denouncing these violations. And so we invite all of you, and if any of you want to share testimony, please talk to me afterwards and we can figure out how to include you in the hearing as well. Thank you.
So these are our objectives for today. We're going to talk about the definition and scope of trafficking, how the identification and outreach, and the U.S. law. So these are some questions that hopefully you'll be able to answer by the end of the session. Are these true or are they myths? So I'm going to let you think about it and move on because I don't have that much time. So first, the definition and scope. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, no state or territory is immune to human trafficking. So these are just some statistics for the U.S. as well as globally. Every year in the U.S., 16,000 to 18,000 men, women, and children are trafficked into the U.S. 800,000 people are trafficked across national borders. 12.3 million are forced into labor, bonded labor, or child labor and sexual servitude at any given time. Other estimates are at anywhere between 4 and 27 million. 80% of transnational victims are women and girls, and up to 50% are minors. The thing about the statistics for trafficking is that nobody really knows what the numbers are. It was interesting because when some of the trafficking laws first passed in 2000, the State Department estimated that there were 50,000 individuals trafficked in the United States every year. For some reason, the numbers have slowly gone down. I think it's an issue of identification and outreach, but because the issue is so hidden and so invisible, it's impossible to know exactly what the numbers are. So in the United States, this is how we define a victim of trafficking: any person forced to work or engage in commercial sex, and any child induced to engage in commercial sex. So in the first bullet point, there's an element of force, fraud, or coercion that has to be present. And then if you're a child, if you're under 18, if you're working in the commercial sex industry, by definition, you're considered a trafficking victim. So setting the stage, what are some of the things that lead to trafficking? And this was alluded to in some of the previous presentations, but there is an economic sort of push and pull factor, political and other social factors, economic disparity, high unemployment, disruption of traditional livelihoods, discrimination in the home countries, personal reasons, civil unrest. There's many factors that lead to why trafficking occurs. The recruitment can be global, so there's a lot of people in the States, documented or undocumented, who are preyed upon by individuals who exploit their labor. Just to give you an example, in Korea, we have a lot of clients who are trafficked from Korea, and it's a very, very intricate system of trafficking. There are individuals in Korea recruiting folks. They tell them to get their passports made, that everything will be taken care of, that they will have good work opportunities in the United States. They meet them at the airport, they put them on the plane. They usually fly to Canada or Mexico. There's another person here who meets them at the airport. They're handed off to another person who drives them across the border. Then they're handed off to another person who's going to integrate them into the industry where they're going to work. So according to some of the law enforcement individuals that we work with, Korea has one of the most intricate and difficult to track systems because the brokers are so well organized. So it's been very challenging. Like I said, who are the traffickers? They could be crime rings and networks, various employers, government officials. We've had cases where diplomats bring their maids, other workers with them to this country, and then they're exploited for their labor. Family members, we've had domestic servitude cases where people bring over their spouses, their wives, and then they're isolated and trapped into a trafficking situation. So one of the things that we've been working on is identification and outreach. And these are some of the things to look for. How are the trafficking victims entering the United States? Some of them have travel documents. They could be legitimate and they could be fraudulent, and then many also enter without inspection, which means they don't have documents and they're usually brought in through Mexico or Canada. One red flag to identify a trafficking case is if the employer confiscates the passport. It's very common, although a lot of traffickers have seen that that's one thing that law enforcement looks for, that the passports are confiscated, so they're now letting a lot of the trafficking victims keep their passports so that they won't be considered trafficked. So the traffickers are very smart, and they change according to how much law enforcement is, how smart law enforcement is becoming in identifying victims, and they're changing their tactics. So is smuggling and trafficking the same? Many people are confuse these two terms. Smuggling is facilitating the illegal crossing of a non-citizen into the U.S., and trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion for forced labor or commercial sex. They were labeled as material witnesses, and we tried to work with law enforcement to interview them and to screen them to see if they were trafficked, and law enforcement was not very cooperative. We actually went into the jails and tried to interview them, and we actually did identify many of them to be victims, but we just could not get access to them, and because of the culture of trafficking, many of them ended up just going back into the trafficking situation. So I think that's a really good question and something we really need to examine. I think that the problem is huge, and so that's one of the reasons why we are trying to do a lot of outreach and identification.
And I think you were mentioning Elvira Arellano, who was the woman from Mexico that was in, she had been in sanctuary at a church in Chicago and then came here and was deported. She is back in Mexico with her son. She was reunited with her U.S. citizen child. She continues to be very active from Mexico, very involved in supporting immigrant rights activists here in the United States. Similar to Elvira, however, there are a number of other families, we don't know how many either, that are in churches that have given them refuge. There's actually a growing national sanctuary movement where churches all over the country are providing a safe space, a safe harbor for immigrant families that are in deportation proceedings. Right now, we know that there are about 15 families, but there probably are many more than that we will not know the exact numbers because of the fear of deportation. In Iowa, as you may have heard just last week, or 2 weeks ago now, there was a big raid, the largest raid in one plant that immigration did, and they came with criminal arrest warrants for about almost 400 workers. As a result of that raid, there were about 200 workers that also sought the refuge of a church because they were afraid that they also were going to be picked up by immigration. So this is a grave concern. Elvira Arellano was in the leadership in that movement, but there are many, many people seeking that type of refuge.
If there are any more questions, if not, we wanted to thank the panelists here for this presentation. Thank you. At this time, everyone's going to break up into their respective workshops. Like we said, workshop 1 will cover the history of progressive Korean American movement, which is a continuation of the first panel discussion that we had. Workshop 2 will discuss the U.S. immigration policy and worker rights. And workshop 3 will cover Korea after People's Uprising. All of the information on workshops are contained in your booklets, and the room assignments are outside the door if you step out. 지금까지 이어진 주제 발표를 기본으로 저희가 분과 토론회를 3개 마련했습니다. 첫 번째 분과 중 항쟁 이후의 한국이라는 주제를 가지고 분과 토론이 이어지겠고요. 분과 토론회 방에 관련한 안내는 러비에 나가시면 있습니다. 분과 토론이 끝난 다음에 조금 점심시간이 늦어졌지만 끝난 다음에 점심시간이 이어지겠습니다. We're a little bit behind schedule, but after workshops we'll be led to the cafeteria for lunch, and afterwards we'll gather back here for the afternoon session.